Yes?
I apologize if I'm getting off track on this one, but correctly. So if you want to get a public record like a photograph or a document, and you want to publish it in a book, do you need to get copyright permission for that from the state government, or how does that work?
The only thing that's copyrighted in the state of Idaho is the code. And so you can't publish your own version of the Idaho Code. That resides solely with the Secretary of State and the Idaho Code Commission. Everything else, you know, be careful. I'd talk to a lawyer before you go in that realm. Yes?
What about publicly owned art?
Go ahead.
Publicly owned art, if someone wants a copy of a picture that we have out, you know, I mean, when it's not really...
Or just say you can examine it during regular business hours and take a picture. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more the law enforcement records, which ones are exempt?
So law enforcement records have their own exemptions. It's in 9-335. And there's a whole list of things that apply there. You can't disclose records that, for example, would give away investigative technique. You can't disclose records that would disclose like informant names. And there's a whole list of things there. I will tell you that a lot of times with law enforcement records, the exemption actually expires on a tremendous amount of those records. And in our office's practice has been, and probably will continue to be, that when we close an investigation and we announce it, we prepare CDs with all of the records and just hand them out and say, here you go. And so that's one of those that the exemption isn't forever.
So it closes when the investigation is complete?
It depends. A lot of times within our office what we'll do is we'll close it officially when all of the appeals have run. And it's because we've usually got witness issues or other sorts of things that we want to make sure are handled, and we don't have some ghost of something past that comes back and gets us by releasing those records. The really underlying thing with law enforcement records is the desire to give the accused a fair trial. And in this day and age, with the flow of information, it's already hard based on the information that's out there.
Our office is a little bit different than local law enforcement because when we take on a criminal investigation, we usually also take with that prosecutorial function. So if we don't file criminal charges, we close the investigation. At that point, we say it's inactive and we dispose the records. And that'd be a little different with a sheriff's office that finishes an investigation, sends it over to the prosecutor who's going to make the decision.
Yeah.
And I think there's an exemption in there because, I mean, you start out a criminal case, you've got 6 suspects, and you wind up finally with 1. And so you don't necessarily, for privacy reasons and that personal information stuff, those other 5 names who were, quote, suspects, and maybe had nothing to do with it. So there's a tension.
You know, if you start naming a bunch of people as suspects, you can open yourself up pretty clearly to some significant civil liability as well.
Is that, just one more question, is like the names of the suspects and names of informants and things like that, is that something that can be redacted?
Yes.
Or that they'll, okay.
And it often is.
Okay, so they'll provide the rest of it.
An example of that, we had an officer-involved shooting. We've done a lot of those reviews. We haven't done them recently, but we used to do a lot of those. And at the conclusion of a review of an officer-involved shooting, we would make all of the records available, but we would redact information that was of the private nature that fits within the confines. For example, some of the witnesses may involve financial records, so you would have their bank account numbers or their social security numbers. Those are to be redacted, which we did, and unfortunately, in the volume of documents we had, we missed a couple of those. And so we then disclosed the documents to the media, and we had to go back and retrieve them. We had to sit down with the press people and say, you know, we made this mistake. Here is yet another copy that's redacted properly, but we just missed a couple of bank accounts. But we had to go back and do that. And there is, in those records, there is information that is confidential and should be confidential.
Any other questions? Thanks.
We meet JQ Public and our old friend Helpful the Clerk, who during the course of this workshop inexplicably left the city and is now working for the school district. JQ makes a call to make a public records, JQ calls to make a public records request.
Good morning, School District Office. How may I help you?
Yes, this is JQ Public. I'm working on a PTO project. Could you please get me a copy of the agenda for this week's school board meeting?
Of course. Would you like to pick it up, or can I email it or mail it to you?
I can pick it up this afternoon. I also get a copy of last week's minutes and a copy of the 2003-2004 budget.
Absolutely. I'll have them ready for you at 1 o'clock. Last year's financial audit is available. Would you like a copy of that too?
Oh, thank you very much. I think the audit report would be very helpful. How much do I owe the school board?
Oh, you weren't really asking for very much, so there won't be any fees. See you at 1 o'clock.
I'll be there, and thanks again.
Well done. Now, that's the way it's supposed to work. Agendas, minutes, budgets, audits should be routinely released. That goes for schools, cities, counties, mosquito abatement districts, and yes, even the super secret gopher district. Now, I want to tell you one little story. We only got a couple minutes here left, but interesting story. A number of years ago, when I was a young snot-nosed prosecutor, I had a case. The case was against an individual who'd been convicted of grand theft of a firearm. He stole a gun, and he transposed the serial number. Unfortunately, he transposed the serial number to an actual serial number of a different firearm. That was part of the evidence that we produced against him, and he was ultimately convicted. He then filed an appeal bond. An appeal bond is, I have a conviction, I post the bond, I'm not going to go to prison until my appeal is completed through the court system. So he filed an appeal bond. While he was out on his appeal bond, I charged him with another crime. The crime was theft of power. He had diverted the electrical energy around his power meter and was consuming power, I alleged, illegally. Now, interestingly enough, in the evidence, we had his fingerprints on the inside of his glass power meter cover. Now, he had some interesting theories about how we had acquired his fingerprints and placed them on the inside of his power meter. It was entertaining. I had another case against him, and that was an inattentive driving case. And it was a very busy office, a lot of paper flowing across my desk, and I had some incoming documents. I picked them up, I looked at them, and thought, that's strange, because there was a document entitled Motion to Dismiss Power Meter Case, and another document entitled Motion to Dismiss Inattentive Driving, and it had my signature on it. The only problem was I'd never prepared such a document, nor had I ever signed such a document. Now, behind those two documents were two more documents, and it said Order to Dismiss, and there was a judge's signature on that document. Now, that was pretty curious. And so I talked to the judge and said, did you sign these documents? I've never seen them before. Now, I started to do a little bit of review to find out what had gone on, and very busy clerk's office. And this individual, the defendant in the case, had gone into the clerk's office and said, I'd like to see this file. Clerk just busy, grabs it, hands it to him. He walks off into a secluded location in the clerk's office, looks at the file. A few minutes later, he walks it back and hands it to the clerk. He had forged my signature on the motions to dismiss, and he had forged the judge's signatures on the orders to dismiss. I hope that demonstrates the necessity for maintaining the integrity of public records. Now, I also wanted to give you this important piece of advice. If you choose to commit forgery, it is highly unwise to forge a judge's signature. There is nothing good that can come from that. Thank you very much.